Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees and all of living nature, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. Today, we're having the fourth of 5 programs on the issue of democracy in the United States and the crisis of democracy in a country that since its founding has symbolized the most audacious experiment in democracy, perhaps in modern times. And now we're facing rising authoritarianism. We're facing a strategic attempt to undermine the electoral process, the institutions that undergird democracy, and the suppression of the vote. We understand, knowing that Humanity Rising is global, we have registrations and participants from over 130 countries that while we're focusing on the United States this week, given the urgency of the crisis, knowing that we're heading into a very critical election in November, that rising authoritarianism is plaguing the world, east and west, north and south, so that the microcosm of the United States really is an entryway to a very important, and I would say profoundly relevant discussion worldwide about how we govern ourselves. Because I think it's a safe thing to say that unless we maintain democratic processes around the world in a vibrant, healthy, and inclusive way, we're not going to be able to solve critical challenges like climate change and other critical issues that are besetting the human race in very, very severe ways. So what we're discussing this week around democracy could not be more important for everybody, everywhere. So it's in that spirit that I want to welcome everyone. And I would like to now, as we begin our session, to pause, as we always do on Humanity Rising, and in the midst of all this thicket of challenges, let us just take a minute and relax ourselves into our bodies. Close our eyes if you can, and just center your attention on your heart. And in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving, let us attune with one another. We have many challenges ahead, and only through the coherence of our hearts will we have the strength to do what must be done. Thank you, everyone. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend and colleague, George Caponelli, and also John Steiner and his wife and partner, Margot King, who have been collaborating with George to put this program together. I want to thank all of you very deeply. This is a critical issue. So George, I turn the program now over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. And as always, I thank you for creating this platform that gives us the opportunity to reach people around the world. And as you said, there are people in many other countries. And although it may not seem that this issue is as significant to you at this moment, unless we stem the tide, I can assure you that it will become critical to you, just as the good people in Ukraine at the moment are doing our bidding in trying to hold back that atrocity from being further committed in Europe. So as Jim said, this is the fourth day of 5 days this week, and it's the second week in the Democracy Dialogue series. The last was March 7th through 11th. If you haven't had a chance to watch any of those programs, you'll find them in the Ubiquity Humanity Rising Solutions and Ubiquity Archive. And I can tell you that there are some extraordinary people in all of these programs that it's worth paying attention to if you haven't had a chance to watch to date. Today's program is entitled Personal Perspectives on the Challenges Facing Democracy. And in many of our other programs, we've had a wonderful group of experts, activists, and candidates and office holders. And today we thought it would be important to get some perspectives from a group of people who do extraordinary work in other areas of their lives in contributing to the greater good. But today they're visiting with us as citizens. So before I introduce them, just a couple of framing thoughts on top of what Jim has already said. I truly believe that if we want to save democracy, no matter whether we call ourselves Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, or indifferents, the truth of the matter is, I believe that we the people have to step out of a fog that seems to be engulfing us, of denial and perhaps of despair, that prevents us from recognizing or admitting the severity of the threat to our democracy. I believe the greatest in the 246-year history of this nation. And I believe we have to come out, get awake, and begin acting jointly and individually in great numbers if we are going to turn back this tide that threatens to engulf us. I think that if we do not do that, we the people, as the fifth estate in this system of checks and balances, that there is a high likelihood, as Jim said, that not only will democracy disappear, but we will further endanger humanity, the other species, and the habitat that occupies and sustains us. So as you listen to our guests today, I'm going to ask you again to ask yourself some questions. Are you taking this threat against democracy serious enough? Do you remember and realize that as a citizen in this country, you have both a responsibility, the authority, and the obligation to do a variety of things to protect and preserve this democracy? And so maybe you might want to ask yourself, are you doing those things in a way that can make a meaningful difference? I also want to tell you that I stay awake a lot of nights these days because I realize the challenges that we face. And I also find myself asking, what the hell happened to this country that I love? And yeah, it has a lot of flaws and imperfections, But in many ways, from a standpoint of we the people, it's still the best game in the world if we're willing to preserve it, protect it, and then when we get out of this crisis, refine it and improve it. You know, that toward a more perfect union thing. At the same time, I want to also say that these democracy dialogues, thanks to all of the people who have been part of it, thanks to the collaboration with Jim and John Raymer of Sign Network and John and Margot, and I have been introduced to an extraordinary collection of people who are in the trenches every single day trying to help preserve and protect our democracy. And they give me hope. And so I encourage you to go back and watch some of the other programs and encourage you to listen with your heart today as well as your mind. So if I can have all of the panelists click on, I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then those of you who want to know more can discover more on the site, or you can check out the links that can be provided for each of our guests, and that'll tell you a lot more. So let me begin with Gay Dillingham. Gay is a really consummate filmmaker and activist, and has been for a long time. She's done some extraordinary work, Dying to Know, on Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. She helped coordinate and produce the PBS series on, why am I going up on his name, Gay? Turn your sound down for a second. No, your sound's on, yeah.
Dr. Andrew Weil.
Oh, yeah, Andrew Weil. And a whole host of other really phenomenal films. She's also was appointed by Bill Richardson as a kind of environmental consultant to the administration. And so she's a wonderful guest to have on this conversation today. John Steiner, you know, Margot's not here today, but they've played such an essential role in making the democracy dialogues so critical and important. Tom Eddington, a good friend and a colleague of Sedina and mine on our Ageless Living television series. He's also a well-known consultant and advisor to a number of major companies in Silicon Valley and around the world. Tom's also the founder of Endangered Global that we have a privilege to work with, and he's the host of several new programs here on Humanity Rising. Gordon Devein is an organization and human development consultant, spiritual director, and co-founder of the Claritas Institute. And I swear he's got the best memory of anything that he has ever read in the entire universe. So he's a great contributor. Steve Behrman. Steve, some of you know as Swami Banandananda, who's brought humor and spice to a lot of conversations over the years. He's also very active in the political environment with podcasts and a variety of things. Terry Tillman is a consultant, activist, longtime facilitator of conscious trainings, a very old colleague of mine. We've spent a number of days out in the wilderness with executive teams and the like. Is Trudy coming back on, Steve? You can unmute, Steve.
I can't start the video. The video isn't starting.
So Trudy Berman, who's Steve's partner and has worked closely with him for a long time and does a number of remarkable things on her own, is currently in the dark, and we hope to bring light to her before. There you go. Hey, now welcome. Okay, so our topic today is democracy, and I'm going to begin with a relatively simple question. that I'd like to do a round on where everybody answers. And then after that, let's open it up to a variety of other questions. So my first question is it true, in your opinion, that our nation is currently experiencing its most existential threat in 266 years? And give us one or two reasons why you think it is true. So who'd like to begin?
I'll go ahead and jump in first, George. And thank you and John and Jim for an extraordinary group of speakers this week. I had a chance to watch each of them, and the perspective and the content they brought to the conversation this week has been extraordinary. I think Jenna Griswold on Tuesday, the Secretary of State for Colorado, mentioned that democracy's on the ballot in 2022. And while I hear what she said, and while I support and agree to some extent with what she was saying, my sense is that, at least on the federal level, we lost democracy a couple of decades ago. And at the state level, and Mark Gerson talked about it on Monday, we're fortunate, we're lucky that we have 50 laboratories here in the US. Each of the states are their own laboratory. And my hope is that at the state level, those experiments around preserving, protecting, restoring, reviving democracy is possible. And some of the work that's being done around what Joshua talked about with the policy framework of gerrymandering, primary reform, and ethics and transparency at the state level gives me hope. But my sense is, at least at the federal level, we lost democracy a couple of decades ago. And I'll leave it there and add some more later.
I'll jump in here. Terry speaking. For me, it depends on which frame of the movie I look at. Back in the days when movies were films and it was a series of little pictures. Or which level I look from. There's plenty of evidence that it has fallen apart. And but if I look at it a little differently, it's part of the process. I went back some time ago and reread early American history, and I'm going to misquote and paraphrase, but I think it was Adams that said something about every democracy commits suicide. And Jefferson said something about democracy needs to renew itself. And I think we're in that process of renewing ourselves. It's the phoenix. We're falling into the ashes. And my hope is, democracy, we the people. I'm privileged to have traveled the country and the world, and what I see everywhere is people are basically good. And one of the other founding fathers said something about, as long as the government fears the people, we'll have liberty, and if they don't, we have tyranny. And so to me, it's part of the process. I worked in China, the first time I worked in China, so I'm going to credit China with this, but one of the Chinese clients said, and I wrote this down, if each man swept in front of his own door, soon the whole street would be clean. So my hope is in the people. Individually, we're good. And accumulated, which is, I think we're in the process of that happening. Now, could we destroy ourselves before we come down the other side of the rainbow? Yeah, maybe. Maybe I could go on, but that's my current thought.
Well, I'm hearing an odd sound in the background. Am I the only one that's hearing this?
The water running, it sounds like.
I don't know.
Yeah, we want to probably mute while we're not speaking. I think that's probably a good idea for the benefit of the.
Who's next? Is democracy in serious trouble, and a couple of reasons why?
I'll jump in. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, John, please, you go ahead.
No, Gay. I've spoken a lot before. Yeah, all right. Tom, I want to say, and I'd love to do your question or your statement for a little later in our dialogue about democracy died in Washington some decades ago. I think that's a very provocative and important observation. So I won't address it now. But I think the thing that I want to say, George, briefly in response to what you're saying is yes. I mean, I think it's certainly since the Civil War, I can almost go all the way back. And in some ways, I think it is worse because we had a pro-democracy constituency during the Civil War. And we have a different kind of an anti-democracy constituency now. So yes, I think it's as dangerous as it's ever been. And God only knows what happens come 2022 and then possibly 2024. So totally in agreement. And the other thing I want to say, which you and Jim have pointed out, is just how encouraged I am by the extraordinary work of so many people on the ground, particularly working to register and help people figure out how to navigate the voter suppression laws in the states that they live in so they can vote, and then to get out the vote. And as far as I'm concerned, that's our bottom line. I think we have numbers, and it's going to remain to be seen whether they turn out.
I guess I can jump in now. To me, I think back to the early 1960s, the late Eisenhower administration, early Kennedy administration, and confidence in the institutions in our society, particularly government, was at over 80%, and now it's probably under 20%. And I would say that the pivotal incident of our time that's led us to where we are now is the Kennedy assassination. And because of that unacknowledged perpetration, it has created an ongoing, unraveling sense of mistrust. Like in a family, if there's a perpetration that goes on in the family, the psychological impact of that has tremendous implications. And if that happens in secrecy, and if that continues to happen in secrecy and gets unaddressed, then gradually and over time, there is an unraveling of that center of trust that we have in our system. So what we're seeing right now is the results of nearly 60 years of deception, misperception, and in a way, this division that's occurred because we haven't really been able to tell the truth about a fundamental thing that happened that completely changed the direction of our country when we were young people. So I'll say that that's why we have this is the great unraveling of this democracy, which is reinforced by the social media that creates extreme opposition on both sides, demonizes the other side. And so that's where we are. We have to bring people together, even the people we severely disagree with, even if we think that they're the ones that are preventing us from being a democratic country. We have to actually be so inclusive that we hear what everybody has to say, and we find if the truth hidden behind the lies that we see on the other side.
Thank you, Steve. Gay?
Well, I might, riff on that. Interesting you brought up the Kennedy assassination because in many ways that brought out our shadow too, because we've been operating secretly around the globe and being naive about citizenry. And it also set off the drug war and putting us to sleep instead of waking us up. And the mistrust, I completely agree. 3/4 of our citizens, through an NPR poll recently, said that our citizens do not believe that we're in a serious threat to our democracy. So it is a collective place. I will also say there's something about the personal to political, the local to global, because I'm from Oklahoma. So I have this sort of I guess, advantage and also heartache to go home to the heartland, to my own family, and see what's happened in my own family over the last so many decades. And having two sisters that voted for Trump, one by holding their nose, and the other as a part of that 11 to 13% that can be manipulated with all this data mining that was going on, in the last couple of few elections. And bless her, she was always the gullible one in the family. But we can manipulate our citizenry now with lack of truth, just fake news and misinformation. So we're not in the fact-based world. And we can manipulate large swaths of our population. So I don't know how to fix that yet. Later on, I'll talk about one effort, which is Dinners for Democracy, because transactional organizing, and that's kind of a fancy term for face-to-face or heart-to-heart organizing around dinner tables, and how to re-engage civic discourse and civilized, respectful conversation amongst ourselves. I'm practicing it with my family. I can't say I've figured it out, but in the heartland, I think that these changes are going too fast. The relationship to our energy choices is scaring people. They're based on old paradigms, and we just have to, I guess, engage person to person and heart to heart to bring ourselves all along through these very big changes we need to survive as a species. And I can talk later about some of those personal, the whole game's about consciousness. If we can't change our individual consciousness, we can't change the collective situation we're in. So thank you for time.
Gordon?
Yes, well, I'll comment on what several of you have spoken about, Steve and Gay, the decline of trust, the epidemic of mistrust, which, results in, that's a hallmark of what is called social capital, reciprocity, mutual trust, without which we simply fall apart. But as kind of preparation for today, I've been rereading a chapter in Jacob Needleman's very important book, The American Soul, on Washington's farewell address. I think this is probably something that everyone should read. And in which he said, yes, we have succeeded in vanquishing an external tyrant, an external monarch. But our challenge now is to overcome the internal tyranny of either extreme partisanship, factionalism, or aversion, animosity, those destructive emotions that democracy was really founded on a unitive view of reality, where we're all interrelated, interdependent, interconnected, and therefore, as citizens, our aim is and should be to work toward the good of the whole. So factionalism, that's the kind of thing that fragments our reality, our body politic. John Steiner, you recently forwarded an article I already have in this month's The May Atlantic Monthly by Jonathan Haidt, called How Social Media Made America Stupid, and how this has served as an accelerating force, breeding mistrust, mutual animosity, all of those destructive emotions. But what's really at issue here, I think, and by the way, it's not just democracy, it's life, because we know that the complex adaptive living systems, such as our world is, they go in one of two directions. To the extent that they are cooperative, mutual, they work, in a kind of dynamic holism, always working toward a wholeness that is well-being, but where an immaturity of competition, me against you, of us against them, occurs, that what takes place is entropy. So the choices are basically entropy or evolution, co-evolution, co-creativity. And we're really at that cusp. And what is at issue again, is the crisis of consciousness that we now face, which is the delusion of separateness, just the opposite of the good of the whole. That sense of separateness that Einstein called it an optical delusion of consciousness. But that's what fragments our reality, fragments our living systems, and as we've been saying, it's accelerated now by viral social media, which is just pumping more and more disinformation, distrust, and is now being empowered by artificial intelligence. So the zone is Steve, as Bannon says, we're flooding the zone with just incredible crap, and yet and I just want to I don't want to take too long here, but there's a fundamental competence for democracy. And that's what our founders called reason, and that's what they meant by the American idea of liberty, is obedience to what is highest within ourselves and within our community. That's what Washington and the founding fathers called reason. Not just some mental rationality, but obedience to what is highest within ourselves and within our community. Needleman says, by reason, the founding fathers are speaking of a power within man that is capable of apprehending the essential truth and form of the universe, of universal reality and morality. The essential truth and form of universal reality and morality. So what's happening to that capacity, and what are we doing most significantly in our education systems, to build that competence so that our kids are not prey to the lies of social media, but they have within themselves an inner compass, a moral compass, a guide. And I think that on that not only democracy, but the well-being of our living planet depends.
Thanks, Gordy. Trudy, are you ready to jump in? Trudy, are you still on?
She's on mute, George.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Gordon, in all of you. That was, I'm really getting that we are right now as a humanity, as a species, at a choice point. That is, this is the choice point. It's this is the point where we either feed the wolf of fear or we feed the wolf of love, as the Indian prophecy goes. And it's a realization also to now know our own mind and know the mind of what's going on here. And what's going on is in this whole energy, first of all, biologically speaking, as Bruce Lipton says, cellular biologist, we are only ever biologically in growth or protection. And if protection is out of balance and manipulated, it's called fear. And the operating system of this energy that is overtaken the planet is fear, secrecy, and division or separation. Separation from each other, separation from our higher selves and our very divinity and spirit. And this is what is going on and has been going on. And when you're biologically, if you're in that, you are in it. It's the only choice you have. Because one of the things that Bruce says is that we're either in our higher mind, the frontal lobe, or we're in our hind brain. And when we go from the higher lobe, for through fear, put into the hind brain, we become, as he says so wonderfully, less intelligent. And it's separation from ourselves right at that point. So the biggest thing right now is, what are we going to choose? Are we going to remember who we are and choose the love that we are? And that's it. That game is over. That other game is over, because only love prevails. That's it. And so that's where we're at as a species. And is to make this choice. We have the choice. And everything else falls in line after that. And one of the things, we have a wonderful sign here that says, only love prevails. And I remember when we got that, great. And then one day I looked at it and I saw only love prevails, all the veils. There was only love, and only has been love. And that's the thing to remember right now.
Thank you, Trudy. So some thoughts and then some next questions. There's no doubt that there's great truth in what each of you have added to this conversation. What I'm aware of is that in nautical terms, there's a term called in extremis. And in extremis happens when a ship is on a collision course with another ship, is about to run aground, or is in a serious storm and subject to capsizing. Normally, when ships are at sea, there are rules of the road, just like there are rules of the road for cars. You pass on one side or the other, you signal, you do a variety of things to keep the ship safe. But when this condition called in extremis comes up, you have to set aside everything else except to focus on preventing the ship from capsizing, running aground, or being in a collision. So no matter where we are, whether we take Tom's perspective that on a federal level, democracy died several decades ago, whether we look at Washington's perspective as Gordy enunciated, no matter what the reasoning is, no matter what the but if or what if is, in the end, we are either going to save this ship whether it is leaking, whether it is listing, whether it is rolling, whatever it's doing, or we're not. And that's the issue that I feel compelled to address in my life at this time. So as bright, well-educated, informed human beings, we could probably spend the next century analyzing and evaluating how we got here, or even what's going on. But the question I have is, what are we going to do about it? It seems to me that there is a gross failure on the part of a lot of people in leadership positions to be truth tellers at a time that the world desperately needs truth tellers. Truth tellers who speak simply and directly from the heart about the critical challenge we face. It is inconceivable to me at some level that we have so lost our sense of personal integrity, our sense of personal commitment for the life that we lead, that, as Gay said in one PBS poll, 3/4 of people surveyed don't really believe that there's a serious challenge going on, or it's the most serious challenge.
Most serious.
Yeah. So my question to us is, if you are the captain of a ship that is in extremis, what do you do in this time to save the ship?
Yeah, thank you for that framing, George. And I'll just jump in and really build off of some of the things that that each of you have shared so far. If I look at human evolution over the last couple 100 million years, as a species, we're still in our adolescent stage of development. And unfortunately, we're living on a finite world with finite resources. And just like an adolescent, and any of us who've been parents, we see our adolescent children who get themselves in trouble. And they are beyond, the problems are beyond their capability. And that's where we are as a species. And human consciousness, and many of you have already referenced it, human consciousness hasn't evolved to a point. I've seen several chats about spiral dynamics, and thinking about spiral dynamics, we're still at a tier 1 at the various places in tier 1. And yet the complexity of the world, be it climate change, biodiversity loss, loss of democracy, those problems are so complex that our consciousness doesn't know how to solve for those problems. And the only way out is for the human species to evolve to adulthood. And the question is, can we, as an adolescent species, get to adulthood quick enough to deal with these complex problems? And the knee-jerk reaction has been to elect authoritarian leaders, just like an adolescent child looking to their parent to solve their problems. And for me, in answer to your question, George, that's the fundamental question, or fundamental choice point we have is, how do we evolve our species fast enough, and do we have enough time? And I don't know, honestly. That's the open question.
Tom, I just want to, John, let me just say something, and then I know you want to comment. While I believe that what you have just said aligns and is accurate with my perception of things, I'm also aware that at the most fundamental level, there is still a mechanism inside every human being, when provoked, when pressed, that deals with the fight or flight mechanism. And what astounds me at the moment is that mechanism appears to be muted in far too many human beings. And so I have to conclude that those of us who know have not done a good enough job in articulating the danger that we're in. because it doesn't take an evolved consciousness to make a decision to either fight or flee.
Well, George, as you know from the film that I worked on a couple of years ago, The Third Harmony, we know scientifically, socially, psychologically, biologically, we as a species come into the world hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. We already have that in us. And the question is, what is it going to take to activate that collaboration and cooperation? How do we, as Trudy was mentioning, how do we move each of us individually and collectively from fear to love? And what is going to be the spark? What's going to be the catalyst to shift human consciousness from fear to love? And it requires trust. And at the basis of trust is for individuals to be seen, to be heard, and to be appreciated. And the systems that are in place aren't fostering that kind of safety, aren't fostering that kind of trust. And so as Gay was mentioning, having people getting together to have dinners together, to be in community, to be in conversation, can foster that sense of safety, can foster that sense of trust to help shift human consciousness. But that's the challenge each of us have.
John, you were going to say something before. I apologize.
Gay, this time you get to go next.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't plan on talking about any of this in today's panel, but it is up, which is the convergence of the opiate crisis with the pandemic and all of us being forced into our homes, into ourselves, not being distracted with socializing and all the other things. And I think it's seriously impacted our entire world in a way we will be, revealing for a very long time. But because I made this film about death, but also about psychedelics with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass through their relationship. I did that. I only had the privilege of doing that after being banished by my own Republican governor after managing the most comprehensive greenhouse reduction regulations in the country. So I stuck my neck out, did that. I'd do it again. It took many years and hundreds of hours of testimony. And that's my environmental side. But when I really, we decided to protect our own environmental business, I had to put my head down because we were getting attacked and the business was getting attacked. So it took me into a very contemplative place. This is about 2010, 11. And I said, why is all the information out there, but we're not acting on it? And I came up with the conclusion, we have not naturalized ourselves. We're not in the cycle of nature, which is life and death. So we have to become intimate with our own impermanence and mortality in order to handle climate, in order to handle all the big issues in front of us, democracy, the apathy that's going on. So there, I do have a lot of hope because I'm watching all the studies that have been, going on for quite a while around consciousness and psychedelics and end of life. And these are really getting serious, play now in our wider mass media and changing individual lives. And if we can continue to help wake ourselves up and away from the things that are putting us to sleep and the tragedy of this opiate crisis, and we are in pain, but we have to identify what that pain is. And I'm also involved with another documentary called Humankind. So I agree with Tom. We are hardwired for collective and working together and loving each other. And we have to fight and be brave enough to get into leadership and the legal structures and Congress and our own local legislatures to combat this misinformation and the division that comes with the misinformation, and not be afraid to pass laws that say it's not okay. I know we have freedom of speech, it's a fundamental, but freedom of truth, what happened to that? So I don't want to take too many tangents here, but It's all connected. We have to teach our children civics. I'm fortunate to have an 18 and a 22-year-old in our home. And, you know, we need to really hear from them, how they're feeling about things as well. So thank you for putting this together. It's a very engaging conversation.
John, you ready?
Yeah, always ready, George. So, so what I'm hearing, if in a certain way, in the long term, this conversation is saying the glass is half full, or maybe more than half full. But in the short term, a number of people said basically the glass is half empty, or even less so. And I want to say that I think the glass right now is half full. And yes, there's the war between pro-democracy forces and authoritarian forces, or we could say between the forces of love and the forces of fear. And my belief is that already we, quote, have a majority. And our challenge is to pull that majority together, not as a third party. You don't want to have a third party until it can be a first party, but as a third constituency that has power to do the things we're talking about. So to me, that's our organizing challenge starting in 2023. And some of you know, a few of us have worked on this for a while and will continue to do that. 2022, I think is really simple. You find an organization that's on the ground doing good work, and you choose to work with them, period. Or you register people where you're living, or you work with people who want to run for office. There are 100 things that any citizen can do. And it's nice to have a more generalized conversation about where we're going as a species. But where we are as a species is right now, right here. And George, I really want to acknowledge the passion for democracy. And democracy is as much or more code red than is climate. And without solving code red for democracy, we burn even more. We burn collectively, and we burn as a species. And say it's democracy or climate, it's the same. There is so much any one of us can do by aligning with the extraordinary work that is happening. It's under the radar, and I think it's going to create a majority in 2022 and 2024. I am happy to work with anyone on this panel or who's listening about what you think is the best we can do. We're looking to do an on-ramp for citizens with an organization that's out there through the Bridge Alliance that Mark Gerzon and my wife Margot and I helped found. And the effort is called citizenconnect.us, which is talking about what's going on in the collaboration transpartisan field, but is about to have a landing ramp that lists organizations and says what any citizen can do. And George, I know you're working on a book that I think can be part of that. So part of me wants to say, yes, let's have these nice, general, important conversations. And I won't use the word get to work now, and just pick something. 5 minutes a day is enough to support some of these organizations. And we've had them on with the Democracy Dialogues. You can find them. And again, I think George and I and Jim are happy to share with you any of them and see what's the right match. I think we're in a dating match situation where it's time for us to find our right date. We don't have to marry, but between now and November of 2022.
Steve, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to keep going back to the early 1960s, and when, speaking of farewell addresses, when Eisenhower gave his farewell address.
Steve, I'd like to ask a favor.
Okay, good.
I'd like to ask you to respond to what I said any way you want before you say what you're going to say.
Okay, good. So one of the things that I've been working on is a podcast called Front and Center, writing our new story together off the political battlefields onto the cooperative playing fields with Michael McSenty. And the focus of this is to bring people together from all sides beyond the limitations that I'm starting to see right here in this podcast, to include people who totally disagree with us, to find out what the truth is so that we can rebuild trust fundamentally. I understand the urgency right now that you're talking about, but there is an elephant and donkey in the living room. And it's elephant and donkey because, unfortunately, it involves the entire political system. What Eisenhower warned against, the military-industrial complex, has now become more complex than that. Military, industrial, pharmaceutical, media, high-tech complex. And when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, I feel like in the last year, remember that book back in the 70s, Black Like Me, that guy Griffin wrote? He somehow treated his skin to become a black person and wrote about what it was like to be a black man in America, in the South, and so on, as an insider. I feel like I need to write a book called White Like Me, because over the past year, because of my personal position on medical freedom, I've had to consort with all of these people that I would have, not wanted to be with a year and a half ago. And what I've discovered in that process is that the misinformation and disinformation is really perpetrated by the extremes on both sides. And it's only the heart-to-heart communications that people can have individually and the beginnings of rehumanizing one another that can get us to the point of finding a higher truth together. I've had to be in this phase of cognitive dissonance where I'm reading something in the mainstream press that totally contradicts everything that I know in my life. And I've had to somehow pretend that that's truth, and what's being called disinformation I'm seeing is really missing information. So unless we acknowledge that information that we're receiving from official sources is tainted and distorted as well, and until we begin to listen to the objections of the people who we would say are on the other side, who we consider anti-democracy forces, they're asking for the other balanced part of the American promise. The American promise being freedom and community, and having that ability to have our personal freedom in the context of the larger picture. And because of the distortions intensified by social media, people have defaulted into a fearful position rather than looking at what is it that we all have in common. Let's focus on what we all have in common and have that conversation so that we don't devolve any further. Because I'm seeing that devolution where people are going, the government is out to get me, therefore I'm...
Steve, I'm going to, as a co-host, could you wrap this up so somebody else can speak?
Sure. I'm just saying that it's very, very important that we go deeper in the dialogue with people who we disagree with to find out what their point of view is that we may be missing.
So, Steve, thank you. And I know that that's a theme or a topic that has come up in a variety of different ways. And I just want to say 7 months. 7 months is the amount of time that we have to save democracy. And that many of the things that all of us in our hearts know are significant and important fixes are going to take a hell of a lot more than 7 months to come about. I go back to that term in extremis. 7 months before collision, 7 months before capsizing or running aground. What I would really like us to pay some attention to is what can we do in 7 months? John has a set of specific actions in terms of supporting those people in the half full part of the glass who are doing a lot. What else can we do as a group? One of my understandings or appreciations is I honestly believe that Americans have lost the ability to experience how their actions produce a direct result. Too many of them. And so the question is, how do we give them those opportunities? John's suggestions are amongst those. What other way? I believe, for an example, that instead of all going off in different directions, if our activist and advocacy organizations came together with one single focus, save democracy, and here are 5 or 10 ways to do that, I think we could accomplish a great deal more. What else are some of the actions that we can take in 7 months to prevent the collision of this ship with a future none of us want to live
in? Where to start? I don't mean this to be advocating passivity, and I don't mean it to be contrary or adding to any polarity, but I'm aware that what I may say could appear that way. I think it was Lincoln that said something about appealing to the better angels of our nature. And whatever we call that, the spirit, the essence, the heart, love, soul, God, higher power, whatever. I have faith that that's a lot more capable than I am as a personality, as a mental ability, as this form. And I look back, I'm noticing we got a good percentage of gray-haired people here in this panel. And along with that comes experience and wisdom and a perspective. Does anybody younger or even amongst us care to listen? I don't know. But the only thing I've seen, and I would categorize this as wisdom, is the only way we'll ever have unity is through diversity. We're not going to line up in a coherent, agreed sentence and all collect enough people. And I don't expect the people who created the problem to solve it. So that to me is one level of leadership we identify as government. My dad was secretary of the Republican Party in Oregon for a period of time. And as a kid, I can remember listening to the meetings they had around the dining room table. And what I remember hearing over and over again, they would say, who can we get to run for mayor? Who do you want to support for governor? Da, da, da. And what I remember was how often I heard, we just can't get good people to run. And this is in the 50s. And as it changed, on the other hand, cream rises to the top. Well, so how do I support that process? It's a natural process. Cream rises to the top. So where's the cream? Well, maybe it's me. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. And how do I've spent over 4 decades doing what's called leadership training with individuals and people all around the world, 101 countries. And I was never intending to teach people how to lead other people. It was, how do you lead your life at the highest degree of integrity and from inside out, and that to me is follow your heart, be heartfelt. So my work has gone into a spiritual direction. I meditate, that's what I can contribute. And then I go out and I do good. I do my best to be kind. Yesterday I was running down on the Santa Monica beach and I saw some litter and I picked it up and put it in a garbage can. I'm not saying, look how good I am. I'm saying that's leadership too. And if enough of it, I was in the director of the Seattle Science Museum was in one of my seminars, and this is decades ago. He showed me a holographic camera and how it worked and explained how they reflect laser lights off the object and create the image. And that was fascinating, but what was most fascinating, he said, if you take this holographic plate that the image was projected onto, break it into pieces, and then reflect the laser lights off of any piece, the same whole image is reproduced. And to me, that was, lights on. The hole's in every part. If I want a better whole, then I got to do my part. I got to make my part of that whole better. And I could go on and on with the metaphor, but to me,
Terry, the truth is that it's an and, it's not an or.
I agree, George. I agree.
Okay.
I'm saying the same thing.
Yes, so that's what I'm saying too. Let's keep talking about the ands, because none of these things have to be taken off the table. You can meditate and go out and do what you do with greater consciousness, which is something that we can all do. What else can we do in the 7 months to support and encourage a shift? Gay?
Well, some of the organizations like Emerge America, which is getting women to vote. Each state has their own, Emerge New Mexico, and that's really made a difference. And the other thing I wanted to say is it's short-term and long-term strategy, but the long-term strategy that we used in New Mexico, which is amazing, it's been going on a couple of decades, and George, you're somewhat familiar with this too, here is, we're an energy producing state, and yet our entire two out of three of our congressional representatives are Dems, our governor's a Dem, our 2 senators are Dems. Not that we need all Dems, but we're a diverse state, and yet over long-term infrastructure building of a more progressive movement, we've been able to do this. And it didn't start yesterday. It started a couple decades ago. So getting women involved, and the short term, the Dinners for Democracy, we actually have a specific strategy inside of the fact we want to get people around a dinner table. And that is to get people to register to vote, because not enough people are even registered, let alone voting. It's half of our citizens are not even registered. So how do we start with registering people in swing states? And the transactional organizing is what motivates people. It is confirmed that rather than somebody with a clipboard on a street corner is not going to engage someone as well as a friend to friend or someone that you know. So how do we get that diversity around the table in every way and get people to register? So that's
Gay, I just like to do a quick follow-up on that. And this, one of the great groups doing that, you could call it transactional, or I love the phrase relationship organizing at that level, is the Movement Voter Project, working with amazing organizations on the ground that are particularly registering people of diversity, of color, LGBTQ. And if you would put in the website the registration of women that you're working with, I'd love to see that.
Gordy, we haven't heard from you in a while, and anyone else who has another "and" to add to this conversation of what can we do in this moment of in extremis to add velocity? Go ahead.
Yeah, so, and John, addressing what you're talking about as what's current. One of the things that we know that's current is a really emotional, kind of irrational focus on education, which succeeded in electing a Republican governor of Virginia. I just recently heard the governor of the state of Florida condemn social and emotional learning. I mean, this is simply extraordinary. So let me just say that it's really critical. People are concerned about their children, and that's the concern about the future, but with an extraordinary distrust and paranoia about education, and an ignorance about what's needed. So, Gay, you used the term hardwired. In 2003, there was a report by the Commission on Children at Risk called Hardwired to Connect, and basically said children are born hardwired to connect to their own deep selves, to other people, to nature, and to transcendent meaning and purpose. But in our production model delivery systems that we call our education system, which are basically programming efforts, rather than developing the inner lives of kids, that isn't happening. And so that reports that because of the failure to address that hardwiring to connect by leaving kids disconnected, that 25% would not achieve what they called productive adulthood. And we're dealing with mental illness or needing to be medicated. So then fast forward to the 2001 report collectively by the Aspen Institute and the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. And the name of that report, which is online, is A Nation at Hope. A Nation at Hope. This follows the Reagan era report called The Nation at Risk, which said we just needed to pump more math and science into our kids to defeat the Soviet Union. A Nation at Risk is about the purpose of education becoming that of holistic human development. And that means developing our hearts as well as our minds, our capacities for empathy, creativity, and the ability to deal with freedom. That competence that is the competence we need for conscious evolution. Our education systems are at the very core of this. And therefore, I think we really need to be attentive to that, because that's what's coming up as such a huge issue in this coming election.
So, Gordy, first of all, there's nothing about what you said that is refutable or arguable. The question becomes, we understand that what got the governor of Virginia elected was a false narrative about education. What I hear a great deal about throughout the news are people talking about all of the things that children shouldn't be learning. So one of the ways, before we have the opportunity to reconstitute the educational system, one of the things that needs to happen is that people who believe what you believe, who recognize the frailty and the folly of that educational concept, parents who want their children to actually be able to learn have to start opening their mouths and speaking out, instead of letting the narrative be directed by those who want to collapse and retard. 7 months in extremis. Yes. What can parents do to speak differently, and how can we help them do that? Is there an organization like the many organizations that John has talked about who are helping with voting and gerrymandering and all the rest of it? Is there an organization where parents can come together and say, that's bullshit, and this is what needs to happen in education, just as a countering? I want to invite Jim in. We have a somewhat limited period of time remaining. I also want us to know that I'd like, in the next Democracy Dialogue Week, to reconvene this panel and add other people to it who can also speak to the issues, and that in the meantime we can think about what and how we can do it rather than if it needs to be done. Jim, are you there?
Yes.
Come back in.
Thank you, George, and thank you, everyone. What a marvelous conversation that we've been having. I have so much I want to say. I don't know how I'm going to limit myself to just a minute or two, but I'll try. I want to pick up on Tom's comment that democracy in America at the federal level died many decades ago. And because I think that's important to understand if we're going to make the kind of moves we need to make, as per George's last point, in the next 7 months going into November. Because I think there has been a declining capacity of the United States for democratic processes that really go back probably 75 years. And so what we're experiencing now in 2022, I think, as Tom very rightly pointed out, is not sudden. It's the culmination of a process that has left us with deeper and deeper paralysis, polarization. So to fix it requires, in my view, a shift in the collective consciousness far deeper than whether you manipulate voting rights in a particular state at what I would consider a superficial level. If I could just take 1 minute on this, George, because I think it's really important, and I would welcome a deeper discussion sometime down the road. I just would refer to Arnold Toynbee and his study of history, where he looked at all the civilizations and imperial systems, and they rise and they fall. No exceptions. The United States is an imperial system, as a civilization, as it were, has risen and is now in its fall, just like Athens 2,500 years ago. It was a meteoric rise and it's a meteoric fall. And what happens in Toynbee's case, and I'll do this very quickly, but I want to seed the reasons behind Tom's statement. The first thing that happens, according to Toynbee, is that the polity begins to fall when the disparity between the rich and the poor get exacerbated to such an extent that the center no longer holds. And we see that in the United States. We see it in different countries around the world. And those are the countries that are faltering in their democratic processes. That's why I said at the beginning, this isn't just a US phenomenon. At the heart of that, says Toynbee, number two, what happens is as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and the social inequalities get distended, the notion of civic virtue that built the country disintegrates because it's transformed into personal entitlement. So that people, when they see the inequalities, they begin very naturally to withdraw their energy from building the country to getting whatever they can get out of a sinking ship, because they know it's not fair anymore. And if you look at the heart of the politics that have played out in the United States, I think there's a lot that we can learn from Toynbee's analysis of this decline and fall that inevitably takes place. And I think the final point I would make is to draw from Rome, just very quickly. Rome fell after Augustus until the end of the 1st century AD. And then they had a strange phenomenon where a series of 5 emperors so dedicated themselves to good governance that Rome rose again in what they call its second golden age. So to your point, George, and to the point of this entire program, a decline is not inevitable if at a certain point the leadership and the people come together in a renaissance of spirit that places good governance at the heart of the democratic process. And so anyway, I thought I would just draw in some of these historical parallels and contemplations from people who have really studied deeply the rise and fall of imperial systems, because I think it informs our present moment.
Jim, I first of all, I'm grateful for your perspectives that always add to our dialogues in important ways. And I want to, I want to try to mitigate the inevitability, as you did with your reference to Rome, and of the decline of this system that we happen to be a part of. And I want to go back to the simple fact, 7 months in extremis.
Yes,
I want to say that in this instance, I do not believe that the salvation of democracy or the mitigation of its decline is going to happen from leaders. I think it's going to happen from we the people. I think in this instance, if democracy is going to be saved, it's going to have to come from our recognizing that our leaders are either incompetent, they're malevolent, or they're asleep. Not all of them, but enough of them are. So to sit back and wait for the white horse and the leader to ride in to save us is a fundamental error. So what I'm going to suggest for those who are listening and interested, I have a manuscript that is called The Power of One. It's just completing itself. I will make that manuscript available to any number of people that would like to read it and digest it and talk about it. I make it available for free. You just have to get to me at george@agenation.com and I'll send you a copy. And my only request is I want good feedback and I want dialogue on it. But I also want this conversation not to conclude without an awareness that in extremis is the condition that we're in. And philosophy, analysis, all of those things are in the end informative but useless if we do not act. And the question is, how do we act? Listen to all of the people on the Democracy Dialogues. Go to Citizens Connect, go to Emergent America, go to these sites and learn what you can do. And do it. And if it's meditation as well, if it's prayer, it's visualization, do all of those things as well. There are no exclusions. Everything adds to the pot, but you must act. You cannot think about this. You cannot analyze it. You cannot pretend what ifs. You must act to save America, because if it's lost, we will be the losers. And so will our children and every other. 7 months to the midterms in extremis.
Hey, George, thank you. And I want to say yes to everything you said. And I want to throw a few both hands at you. We have good leaders. We have leaders who aren't malevolent. We have civic leaders who are extraordinary. So it's the citizens and the leaders. And Jim, I want to acknowledge what you said, because what we don't have that you're offering, which we can use between now and the midterms, is a new narrative. And the Renaissance of Rome is a new narrative. And what you just said offers a narrative. And without inspiration, the people won't act. And a lot of that has been said today about lack of trust, the whole 9 yards. And what I hear from you is a level of inspiration because of a new narrative, which I have not heard before, that I think is going to inspire citizens to do more. Because I think what we're talking about, and how do we put together transaction and transformation at the same time? Because we have to bring the heart and soul and spirit into action. And I think we can do that between now and November. And I look forward to getting a recording of what you've said and a transcription. And I think it can go viral, and I think it will inspire people to vote in ways they may not have intended to or felt they could. So thank you.
I just want to jump in real quick, if it's all right. John and George, and Jim, you've had some wonderful speakers this week. And John, to your question about what do we do with this next 7 months, I've taken the videos from this week, the interview and the conversation with Jenna Griswold. And I sent it to everybody I know in Colorado and asked them to send it to everybody they know in Colorado and support her candidacy. I've sent the video in the conversation with Stephen Alacara in Wisconsin. And I've asked everybody in Wisconsin to share it with everybody else they have in Wisconsin. The two of them are incredibly inspiring leaders. They're doing really good stuff in their individual states. And I would encourage you, as you heard this week, to bring on folks from Nevada, from Arizona, from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, that are some of the most important states right now, to engage the civic movement in those individual states, to ensure that they've got great leaders elected in their states. And I just want to applaud the three of you for what you've done this week and raising that awareness.
That not only is that a great idea, I want to add Charlie Crist, former governor of Florida, former congressman, is running against DeSantis. He has a chance to beat the guy. And if we can get DeSantis out of the way in 2022, it would really make a difference in this country if Florida elected Crist. Another thing we can do, a little money, people we know in Florida who may be on the sidelines. So Tom, thanks for that inspiration.
Yeah, and John and Margot and George, thank you for the passion with which you have put these together, and your emphasis, George, on the power of one and the need of the people, we the people, to preserve our democratic experiment at this time. And we've got 7 months to go. And I think, just to underscore the obvious, many commentators and activists are asserting that this next 7 months is critical, because if we don't win as we should and need to in November, democracy as we know it in the United States will falter in very, very severe ways. So this is not an inconsequential issue. The history that we've shared, the perspectives that we shared, all are motivated to bring the kind of context that will inspire all of us to take the kind of action critically required. And I think Tom's action is a good example. Just send these recordings out to whoever you can and take little clips. Use this in any way you want, everyone, to the people we know in critical states, including Florida. DeSantis, in many ways, the current governor, is more dangerous than Trump. And so to unseat him in November would be an extraordinary accomplishment to help preserve our democracy as we move into the presidential elections of 2024.
One thing I want to just say, because it's so important at this juncture, those of you who are listening, this is not simply a Democratic Party show. Okay, I want you to know that. We happen to be identifying the difference between sanity and insanity. We're dealing with the difference between capacity and collusion. So Republican, independent, libertarian, Democrat, whoever you happen to be, this is about America. It's about democracy, and it's about what we believe is necessary. And if we don't do what so many of us have talked about between here and November, we're going to lose the ability to do it. That's
George, let me add specific to that. The Renew America movement, you can find online, is also supporting the anti-seditionist Republicans and the Republicans who are members of the Problem Solvers Caucus. So the quote, Republicans for Democracy need to be retained because they work with Democrats in Congress. Tom, to your point, there is still bipartisan work in Congress that can get a few things done.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.
Thank you.
George, just give us a heads up about the session tomorrow before we close.
If I can.
George, I'm happy
Yeah,
to
go
do
ahead.
that one.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Faith
John, go
tonight.
ahead.
Tomorrow, we have one of the great religious and spiritual Christian leaders in this country, Jim Wallace, who I've always felt is in the lineage of Martin Luther King, and his partner, Dr. Barbara Reverend Skinner, who have put together an organization called Faiths United to Save Democracy. They are working with rabbis, ministers, imams, and others in 10 swing states, because those folks, through their congregations, not only can get people to vote, they can navigate voter suppression laws, and they can get them out to the polls on election day. The work they're doing is extraordinary. They're not unlike the Movement Voter Project through the religious and interreligious movement, and they'll have a lot to share with us.
And we want to invite each of you back. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions today. Thank you for your willingness. Any ideas that you have for democracy dialogues, please let us know.
Oh.
People you'd like to see on the program, conversations you'd like to see take place. It's one of our core objectives between here and the midterms. So please, and thank you enormously for the gifts that you shared today.
Thank you, George. Thank you, John. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, panel. This has been magnificent. This level of dialogue, everyone, is democracy. This is what it's all about. The free association of people of goodwill seeking higher truth collectively in meaningful, honest, and authentic interaction. So I just want to acknowledge this group and these programs over the last days on such a critical issue. That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. The link is in the chat box. And we'll see you again tomorrow for our 5th and final program on democracy in crisis in the United States. Thanks so much. Bye for now.